After St. Anselm advances his ontological argument, Gaunilo replies back with his perfect island counter-argument, and then Anselm replies back to Gaunilo. He begins by summarizing Gaunilo's objection, and here's how it goes. One should suppose an island in the ocean which surpasses all lands in fertility. Because of the impossibility of discovering what does not exist, it is called a lost island. There can be no doubt that this island truly exists in reality, hence, one who hears it described understands what he hears. So Anselm offers a challenge to Gaunilo's challenge, which is this. If any shall devise anything existing in reality, or in concept alone, except that than which a greater cannot be conceived, to which he can apply Anselm's reasoning, he will discover it. So the gist of Anselm's initial challenge is this. What he's claiming is that his argument, as he did argue in the original argument, only applies to God, and it won't apply to anything else. So kind of his strategy is to try to develop that point, that the argument works for God and God alone, and doesn't work for anything else. And if he can show that, he would defeat the perfect island objection. So that's what he has to do. So then he turns to his actual reply. So here's how his reply starts to go. Part 1. God cannot be conceived not to be. Why? This being, than which a greater is inconceivable, cannot be conceived not to be. Why? Because it exists on so assured a ground of truth, otherwise it would not exist at all. And what he seems to be contending is that you can't even conceive of God not existing. It's inconceivable because it's such a, truth that if it wasn't true, it wouldn't exist at all. And so that's his lead move. Now his second move is a dilemma. And here's how the dilemma goes. So, if one claims he conceives this being not to exist, at the time when he conceives of this, either he conceives of a being than which a greater is inconceivable, or he does not conceive at all. So he's given two options, either the first part or the second part. So, proceeding in the dilemma, if he does not conceive, he does not conceive of the non-existence of that of which he does not conceive. If he conceives, he certainly conceives of a being which cannot be even conceived not to exist. If it could be conceived not to exist, it could be conceived to have a beginning and an end. This is impossible. So, put a little informally, and of course by being more informal, less accurate, he's kind of doing this. He's saying there's two possibilities. When you say that this being, and I'll just shorthand it to God, if you claim God doesn't exist, there's two possibilities. Either you're talking about God and saying God doesn't exist, or you're not. You're using the word God, but you're not referring to God. So if a person is not actually talking about God, they're using the word, but they're not really referring to God, they can't be denying God's existence because they're not talking about God. And if they are talking about God, they can't conceive of God not existing, so they can't say that God doesn't exist. Why not? Well, you'd have to say that God doesn't exist, you'd have to think of God as having a beginning and an end, but God doesn't. That's impossible, so you can't be thinking of God. So what's kind of the structure of the logic going on here? And I'll offer an explanatory analogy that hopefully will illustrate it a bit. And it's not an exact recreation of his argument, but it tries to show what he's kind of doing logically here. And I'm offering an explanatory analogy. This is not what Anselm says, so not Anselm talking here. This is me just trying to kind of explain what he seems to be doing. And he's setting up this kind of dilemma. So imagine if someone claims that triangles don't have three sides. So you're talking to someone, about geometry, as one does, and the person says, you know, I hear a lot of talk about these triangles, but I don't think they have three sides. So there's two possibilities. If someone claims triangles do not have three sides, either they're conceiving of triangles or they're not. Either they're thinking about a triangle or not. If they're not thinking about a triangle, they don't conceive of a triangle not having three sides. So if you look at them and say, how can you deny the triangles have three sides? It's tri is right in the name. And they say, oh, because they got that shape kind of like square shape, those four sides. And then of course you'd say to them, oh, you're not thinking of a triangle, you're thinking of a square. So if someone is thinking of a triangle, they must be thinking of a three-sided figure. And to deny it would be impossible. So if they're denying the triangles have three sides, they're either not thinking about a triangle, in which case they're not denying triangles have three sides, or they're thinking about a triangle and they're trying to think the impossible. That is just wrong. So that's kind of how Gaunilo's objection is being replied to by Anselm. Essentially that if one is thinking about God, you can't deny God's existence. And if you're not thinking about God, you're not denying God's existence because you're talking about something else. The third part of Anselm's reply to Gaunilo is this, that it is inconceivable. So, he who conceives of this being, that which nothing greater can be conceived, conceives of a being which cannot be even conceived not to exist. Again, kind of repeating his line that if you're thinking of God, you're thinking of a being that you can't even think of as not existing. But he who conceives of this being does not conceive that it does not exist. If he does so, then he conceives what is inconceivable. And the non-existence of that than which a greater cannot be conceived is inconceivable. And so the gist of part 3 of his reply is that, crudely put, it's just inconceivable. You just can't think of God not existing. And so, as far as Anselm is concerned, he's defeated Gaunilo, and that ends that Anselm-Gaunilo-Anselm battle. And of course other philosophers have weighed in on this over the centuries, and we'll see some of them, including our good dead friend, Immanuel Kant. And next we'll proceed to another saint, St. Thomas Aquinas.